I'm Hena Doba, a national news correspondent, and you're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing.
Yeah. My name is Abhay, and I share conversations with talented and interesting individuals linked to the global Indian and South Asian community. It's informal and informative, adding insights to our evolving cultural expressions, where each person can proudly say, "Trust me, I know what I'm doing." Hi everyone. On this episode of Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing, a conversation with journalist, correspondent, and news anchor Hena Doba. Stay tuned. As always, thank you for listening to the show and for sharing and downloading and rating and kindly reviewing. It's very much appreciated, and I'm quite grateful. In fact, instead of my usual lane of gratitude, this new gratitude goes over the top, or OTT. And in a democratized world where we find that many of our choices for information and entertainment don't have to be limited to the traditional versions, the OTT selections have revolutionized our consumption of content, allowing for a bevy of options that are nimble, fresh, and innovative. And while OTT certainly is unhinged from the confines of legacy and tradition, in experienced hands, that same legacy and tradition can also inform and accelerate. So it was great to catch up with journalist Hena Doba, who over the past 25 years has been reporting and corresponding and anchoring across the spectrum of media options from print and network television to digital and OTT streaming. Hena is a Pakistani American from Queens whose journey has included covering stories like the 9/11 attack in New York, Sandy Hook, and the Iran nuclear deal. After several stops at small and large market news operations in the mid-2000s, Hena was one of the first Pakistani anchors in the US, and soon she found herself anchoring a segment on CBS for many years called The National Desk, with live and original reporting on the nation's trending stories. In 2019, Hena joined Cheddar News and moved into the OTT media streaming space, anchoring shows and highlighting stories of women in tech, finance, and entertainment. So we caught up recently to talk about everything from storytelling to identity to generating trust with her audiences to her ongoing journey, just as Hena started her latest launch last week, anchoring the weekends for News Nation's Morning in America. And as this new chapter unfolds for her, we started by chatting about how she measures her own performance and success.
I have to be honest, I've been doing this for over 25 years, and I've covered some amazing stories in my life, some heartbreaking stories. I've been very fortunate where I've been able to disassociate myself from the news cycles. This time around, this news cycle, I haven't been able to turn the TV off or, I make a very conscious effort not to have any biases when I'm reporting any of my stories these days, whether it's politics or what's happening overseas. And I think as a journalist, there's so many younger journalists popping up or people on TikTok or Instagram where that's not clear anymore. Those journalistic lines of integrity just aren't there. And, people are sharing their opinion. So I think what I take these days with this current news cycle, what I really take a lot of pride in is the fact to be able to tell a story, share it with our viewers, and not make sure my voice or my facial expressions don't show any bias that I may have. And I think you're seeing less and less in that when it comes to broadcast journalism.
Yeah. Has that been something that has been a either comfortable or uncomfortable reality for you to evolve with? Is that something that gets harder and harder to maintain?
It is because I think I'm becoming more aware. One of my first stories was 9/11, September 11th, and I was in a tiny little TV station where, forget somebody being of color, there was no Pakistanis or South Asians, but there was no one of color in that market. So when 9/11 happened, I was in New York City visiting my family. Yeah. And when that happened, I got a lot of racist comments and a lot of racist emails. But I think back then I was just so excited about my career and so young that I kind of built a wall around it. And I think as you get older, you maybe realize the hate more. I don't want to say I've become more sensitive to it. That's not the case, but I realize it more. I don't have those blinders on that I did maybe 23 years ago.
And because of that, right? Because there's no blinders on, because you've become, perhaps more in tune with that, it's actually integrated and pervaded into your work. Do you prepare and maybe even practice a little bit differently now? And does it feel like, because of the sensitivity to, maintaining integrity and really sort of capturing what you do, does it feel like every single iteration and every single news cycle, or every single year for that matter, is yet another step towards mastery? And again, mastery being perhaps a different target.
One thing I've noticed as I go every day, that some days or some stories are just better than others, even after doing this for so long. But one of my news stations was Savannah, Georgia. So I left New York City and I got out of the,
Yeah.
I never left New York really. I went to Savannah, got, left the airport, and the first sticker I saw was "Kill them all, let Allah sort them out." Right after 9/11, very hurtful. I remember thinking,
Yeah.
okay, I'm down south.
Yeah.
But ironically, I saw that same poster 3 weeks ago in Manhattan. And I thought, in some aspects, things have not changed. And I remember thinking that. So it hasn't gotten easier or harder. Like I said, I'm more aware of it, but also there are so many more echo chambers now. So the one thing I do, and if this isn't mastery, I think this is just something that, and I know you do this as well. And this hasn't changed for me. It's research, research, research. I will make sure I listen to every single angle, every single pundit. I will read every single article, whether I agree with it or not, whether it's right leaning or left leaning. And that hasn't changed in my life. The key, I think, that makes me such a good journalist is I'll never stop not only doing the research, but even listen to some pundits or news personalities that I may not agree with, or some shows that I don't completely agree with their point of view, but I'll listen to everything. And I think that is lacking right now.
Hmm. When you think about that, and of course, like, again, sort of, being blind to bias and making sure that you're maintaining that integrity, was this something that you had to, or that you have to continue to affirm, right? And because sometimes I'm imagining that the pressure to, in fact, not be biased is just so much of a ripple effect. Like you said, there's so many echo chambers, and it's hard perhaps not to just basically like find yourself actually inadvertently sometimes morphing into that person who is in fact part of that echo chamber.
When I'm going to talk about the recent news cycle, when the October 7th attacks happened in Israel, for some reason, I got a lot of emails, calling, just derogatory emails. And I had to actually put something out on Instagram saying, hey, I'm not Palestinian, I'm Pakistani. By the way, I don't know enough about this. I'm doing my research. I think it's October
Yeah.
8th or October 9th where I posted this. It was one of my most viral videos. I forgot the number I got. I deleted it because then weeks later it just seemed trite. It just didn't seem, but then the amount of hate I got from both sides. And all I said is, hey, I'm Pakistani, not Palestinian. Also, I don't have enough knowledge on this topic just yet to talk about it. And I was just well, one, I was kind of proud in the fact that I was getting hate from both sides, whether it was, people who are pro-Israel or
Yeah.
pro-Palestine. I
Right.
got hate right? And that's the ultimate compliment as a journalist. So I think it's something I struggle with every single day. And I mean, some of the, and social media is mean, and that part doesn't bother me anymore. It truly doesn't. It kind of just, goes over my head. But some of the hate and racism and ignorance that is out there, it's impossible, no matter how long you've been doing this or how many stories you've covered, where you don't, take a step back and think there's a lot of hate there, so no, I still struggle with this every single day.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned that, among the first stories you covered being 9/11, and of course this most recent news cycle, and there definitely is a sense of pride in making sure that you're unbiased and being part of those moments and sharing very, very objectively with the people who are listening to your stories or hearing your stories or watching your stories. And I'm curious that, as you kind of very elegantly put those two stories and juxtapose those together, is there some sort of common thread for you personally that connects the dots now between those first days as a TV correspondent, taking your camcorder out in, the sort of lower part of Manhattan, and doing what you do now? Is there something that's remained somewhat consistent or anchoring? Is it that integrity? Is there something else about you that you've noted that's like, yeah, I do the same thing now that I did on day one when I was doing this 23, 25 years ago?
Being a good storyteller, that's always the ultimate thing. I want to make sure a viewer is able to understand, even if something is happening half a world away. And what I'm going to take pride in is making sure that viewer, no matter, what their thought is or opinion is on everything, that I'm sharing both sides. And that hasn't changed. Even when I was fresh out of college covering 9/11 to now, storytelling has always been the number one factor. And for journalists, I think the most important thing, and this is whether you're doing this 2 weeks or 20, 30 years, is you have to stay curious. Once you're not curious about everything around the world, then it's time to maybe get out of this business and do something else. So that hasn't changed. The storytelling factor and the curiosity. If anything, with age, I'm getting more curious about everything around me.
Yeah, and does that become kind of an endless pursuit? Because at some point, right? I mean, we do this a lot in medicine, that sometimes there is actually a finality to things, right? That you have to you have to execute, you have to make a decision. And, does that endless pursuit of curiosity, can that sometimes be hindering for some people who perhaps are not as seasoned or have gained the kind of experience that you have?
I have every alert on my phone, every media alert that you can think of around the world. So my phone goes off easily 100 to 200
Right.
times, especially if there's a busy news cycle. So people around me, my husband, it
Yeah,
gets annoying for them. As far as an hindrance, I think that's what it's
sure.
important to have a team around you of good producers. That's when it really becomes a team effort
Yeah,
where in the morning meetings you have those people, where there are an exchange of ideas. There's also differences in opinions and you listen
yeah,
to each other. And I think that teamwork in a newsroom is so important. That's why I think the pandemic was really tough because so many of us were working from home. You remember that news cycle. It was not only the pandemic, it was George Floyd, which was also so polarizing in so many newsrooms. And I remember how
yeah.
hard it was just to have a discussion over Zoom about this issue that so many of us were so passionate about. So I think it's just that exchange of ideas with like-minded people. And I don't mean like-minded as sharing the same opinion as you, but just knowing the world around them and knowing what's going on.
Yeah, almost having that great sense of checks and balances, and people being able to in person sort of feed off of each other, and understand, where the stories lie, and having that great kind of 360 view of an idea and zooming with it. Or like, hey, you know what, this idea doesn't necessarily work, this seems like we should sort of can this and save this for later. You're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. After a quick break, we'll come back to our conversation with Hena Doba. Stay tuned. Every story told is a lesson learned, and every lesson learned is a story waiting to be told. I'm Abhay, and I share conversations with global Indians and South Asians so everyone can say, "Trust me, I know what I'm doing." New episodes weekly, wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Hey, this is Cal Penn. I'm an actor, author, former public servant, and you're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tam France.
Hey, this is Samir Gadia.
Hi, my name is Richa Morjani, and you're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing with Abhay Dandekar.
Welcome back to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. Let's rejoin our conversation now with Hena Doba. I want to go back to something you mentioned as sort of storytelling, and maybe this may be something that is more along the naivete for myself, or for that matter for anybody else who enters this space, especially younger people who are far more digitally engaged maybe than others. You've been a field correspondent, you've been a producer, you've been a host, in this field, and seen the transformation, right, of going from media that's legacy media, over to OTT, over to the digital spaces. And there's sometimes a blur that people may perceive between journalism and storytelling. And is there actually a distinction sometimes between the two? I mean, you're presenting a story, and yet you have to be careful that you're not necessarily narrating the story. I'm curious if that at all comes up for you, especially in 2023, 2024.
That is such a great question. And this is the first time I got asked that question. And I think it's brilliant. And thank you for asking it. I think the biggest factor that blurs everything, especially these days, is making the story about yourself. When I first started journalism, it's like, no one cares about what you think. Nobody cares about what you do. And, I'm always conscious, especially when I was in the field reporter, there were days where I was interviewing somebody who had the worst day of their life. That empathy always came in. I've covered Newtown, I've covered Sandy Hook, I've covered Parkland, I've covered, unfortunately in my career, I had covered a lot of school shootings. And I remember that. I remember the empathy, but I also remember seeing a lot of journalists that kind of made the story about themselves. And I think, and, they were good storytellers, but I think that's where the line comes in. Maybe I'm a little old school, but I know, or I consciously think never to make the story about myself, make it about the person you're interviewing. And whether it's the happiest day of their life or the saddest day of their life, their emotion, their story, your job is to make sure you're telling their story, especially in such a difficult position where they've been nice enough to talk to you, that you relay that story as best as you can.
You made that jump. And first off, that actually makes so much sense because, again, making sure that empathy is at the core of what you do, and particularly ensuring that the focal point is really not the correspondent, but actually the subject. You made that jump from legacy media at CBS to OTT. And I've read that you've shared in the past that you appreciate this idea that it's non-formulary. The approach is non-formulary, and how it offers a lot more flexibility and improvisational, kind of fuel and freedom, even to innovate a little bit. Does this at all in some ways feel natural because it reflects you as a person a little bit more?
Does being OTT feel more natural?
Yeah, or even just that description of, OTT as offering more freedom, offering more flexibility, offering that ability to improvise and really sort of converse on the fly. Does it feel more natural just simply because, in a way, this is probably a little more reflective of you and your persona?
I would like to say yes, but the truth is, ad-libbing and doing those things off script was very, very, it was terrifying for me. When you're at CBS, which I had a wonderful time and I learned so much from great journalists, but as you're, it's very stick to the script. Yeah. This is what you're going to say, and that's it. So I never really ad-libbed. And then you get to these OTT platforms where, and, Cheddar, especially when I started, was very finance driven. So I had to look at the, I had to be at the New York Stock Exchange and break down the big board and things like that. Or just, hey, there's this amazing topic. It just says chat or ad lib. So that was something that completely terrified me. And I'm so grateful for my experience at Cheddar, because now I think I'm a better rounded journalist, because now, if 3 years ago, I feel like Hena talk about this cup for 30 seconds in front of an audience, that would have made me really nervous. Now I'm like, I can talk about this cup for 5 minutes. And I think that's a gift that it's very, very hard. I'm still mastering it. I think so for that reason, it's brought me out of my shell. I was always a good storyteller. I was a little bit shy though. So I wanted to stick to the script. Like, this is what I'm comfortable sharing. But now being at these OTT platforms, you have no choice but to do a TikTok dance or before I only really interviewed politicians. Now I'll interview politicians and celebrities, and it's a completely different pivot. When when it comes to tone and delivery, it's completely different. So it's made me stronger, and now I'm more comfortable. But a few years ago, it was not comfortable at all.
In a way, like a lot of your professional background, and in many ways, kind of the practice and the training that you had, these had to be in a sense unlearned. Are you still in a way kind of unlearning and unwinding some of that to continue to get better at having a 5-minute conversation about a cup?
When I was, again, the more legendary networks, they were voice coaches and you had to talk a certain way. Cheddar, our demo, it was CNBC for millennials and Gen Zers. So as soon as, there was a lot of, what are they called? The test rooms, like where people will, I'm forgetting the word, but when you're sitting in a room and people are watching the newscast, and everything we got was we don't like news talk. We don't like anchor talk. We don't like, a newswoman talking. So the first thing that they taught me when I got to Cheddar is, please, whatever news voice that I worked 20 years to get, whatever news voice you have, please get rid of it. And I thought that, and I do like that. So it seems the younger generations don't like that stuffy journalist, but that's where the thin line is, because then I don't want to be so comfortable where I'm just, spewing anything that comes to my mind. So I think it's just that finding that fine line where you're comfortable, but you're still being responsible with the headlines or the news stories that you're sharing with viewers. Test groups. There we go. Right. Yeah. And I mean, and it's funny because this seems like, in a way, that your comfort has to be natural, and it does flow from a wealth of experience, but it's less, I guess, conjured up, and it's less practiced, and it's less, I guess, formatted is maybe a word that gets in there. Which I'd like to think that viewers relate to more, especially, our kids or the younger generations. I would like to think that. And that's honestly why one of the reasons I came to Cheddar. I remember when I was
Yeah.
leaving CBS, my agent at the time was like, "This people don't leave CBS to go to Cheddar." I'm like, "This just seems exciting and fun. It's something different." And since then, I mean, Cheddar was the first OTT platform, but there's so many out there now. And I still think this is the future. Our kids aren't rushing back for the 5 or 6 p.m. news anymore, like I did when I was a kid. They want it. They want it on their phone now.
Right. Yeah, and we lived sort of in that, on-demand generation for sure, and even that's the kind of pace of lifestyle and sort of like the things that we consume. I'm imagining that comfort in front of the camera, in front of an audience, in front of a story, has been something that's been quite natural for you. And as someone who's kind of seasoned in this work, does this just serve as affirmation for the extrovert? Or if you're truly an introvert, is it a grind and an exercise in constant shape shifting to make sure that you're comfortable in front of that camera?
You ask really good. You're a very good interviewer. At first, I'm more of an extrovert now, and I can honestly say Cheddar made me that way a bit more. I'm Pakistani. I was one of the first Pakistani anchors in the country. I was shy. Nobody looked like me on TV, and I certainly wasn't that Bollywood beauty that people expected. So, when I was a producer, I started behind the scenes and I was put on camera because of 9/11. It was just the stories that kept happening that put me on camera. So there was always that insecurity of not being the prettiest or the lightest or, things like that. And, there were many times my agents in my career were like, "She's not blonde enough," or "We already have a South Asian in the newsroom." There'd be things that would be so openly said. I think it's much better now. And my maiden name was Zulfikar. And every news director that I went to very kindly be like, "We're not using Zulfikar. Like, please change it to something else. Doba is now my married name, so I'm using my name." I don't think that's the case now. I don't think any news director would tell a reporter to change their name. But, I was 20 years old. You think about it, how does that not make you a bit insecure when you're told to change your name? Because, we want your look to be ambiguous. And then you're not, no one looks like you on TV. You're already one of the first. So there's no one to look up to. So there were a lot of insecurities there. But I think with time, I just grew more confident in my talent as a journalist and not focusing so much on what I look like. It took that kind of that turn or that pivot in my mind where like, okay, it can't be, but what color lipstick you're wearing anymore. It has to be telling the story. And that was very important to me, especially as I'm getting older. I am I get treated well, but I'm in this business, my age, it's getting older for TV.
Right. And I mean, does it allow you to more, I guess, gracefully mature and evolve as a professional because you find more peace and solace in front of the camera and being comfortable with who you are? I mean, is it as comforting? I've read this at least, but I mean, is it as comforting as gardening or boxing or doing something else? I mean, is this meaning that like, hey, this is your happy place. You can actually really sort of, zone out and be yourself as opposed to like, constantly thinking what somebody else is going to think about you.
I'm a better journalist because of it. Even now from a year or two ago, I'm a better journalist now. A lot of it has to do with the news cycles that we've gone through in the last 4 years. I mean, there's life-changing things, polarizing topics that affect so many people, including millennials and Gen Zers. So I'm much, much stronger now. And again, it makes me a better journalist now, just being more comfortable in my talent instead of focusing on some things that really nobody cares about. That may be a little bit more vain for me personally.
Has that been a surprise to you? I mean, was this something that aha moment or that pivot, in reflecting on that, is that something that you either had to come to terms with or became a surprise to you as you think about it now?
I had to come in terms with it because it was surprising within my own community. Sometimes I'd get messages like, you're not pretty enough to be Pakistani. You must be this, or, I think that was always hurtful, especially when it's coming from your own community or, my husband is not South Asian. So, hate towards that. So it was those little things that I think, especially when it was coming from my own community, made me very sensitive because I was hoping people would be proud of me and not, kind of ripping my looks apart. But then it is one of those things you have to put that aside. There's always a hate, not to sound cliche, but that hate's always going to be there. But luckily when I'm going to go back to 9/11, when my news director was getting all those emails, like, pull this terrorist off TV, what is she doing there? He could have pulled me off the air, right? I was a producer, but he stood and he's like, no, I'm going to keep her on air. Same thing happened in Savannah, Georgia. And you just need that one or two or
Yeah.
three people that believe in you that really makes the difference. And I think I've been lucky enough where I've had mentors or bosses that put their belief in me and not what the focus groups were saying.
Yeah, and hopefully that charges you and energizes you to, in fact, have that faith and that belief in yourself. And I'm imagining that translates on camera actually very, very much more readily, and makes for a better product.
Thank you for saying that. One of the kindest compliments that I get almost every day is how I'm able to transition from a story, whether it's, a hard news story, then I'm going to a feature story. And I think that's one of the biggest compliments that people give me, that you can transition so easily where you will, catch the viewer's ear. If, most people aren't sitting in front of the TV watching, right? They're helping their kids with homework, they're cooking dinner. So I think that's the, ultimate compliment I get. So when it comes to looking back of my time or just growing as a journalist, I think it's just those little things where you master with time and they come to you. And I used to have an anchor who on her scripts used to have happy face or sad face, so she knew how to deliver the next story. And sometimes that's the biggest challenge. So I think it's those little things, those little minute things that a viewer doesn't notice, and which is good, shouldn't notice, to make you a better journalist.
Right. You're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. After a quick break, we'll come back to our conversation with Hena Doba. Conversation. It's the antidote to apathy and the catalyst for relationships. I'm Abhay Dandekar, and I share conversations with global Indians and South Asians, so everyone can say, trust me, I know what I'm doing. New episodes weekly, wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Congressman Ro Khanna, and you're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing.
Hi, I'm Lily Singh, and you're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing.
Hi there, I'm Abhay Dandekar, and you're listening to Trust Me, I Know What I'm Doing. Let's rejoin now our conversation with Hena Doba. I'm so curious about this because it does reflect back to identity and how pervasive that is in our professional lives for sure. What does it mean for you today, given this entire backdrop of experiences and growing up in New York and at the same time also having been in different locations? What does it mean to be a Pakistani American Muslim woman in journalism at this moment in our kind of media cycles stories as they go from 2023 to 24?
I'm proud to say that there's more of us now. Now I've seen reporters with hijabs, or using their Islamic name at the end, which would never have been possible when I started.
And by the way, there's a reason I asked that. I mean, I'm so curious what this means to you, like today, in reflecting back on all the experiences that you've had, again, as a Pakistani American, as a Muslim woman in media, but particularly, in this era of, boy, it's really hard to predict, given our attention spans for news and stories, what tomorrow is actually going to feel like.
The first thing I want to say is I wish there were more people that look like me and you when, we were younger. So I'd like to think that there are little girls who see people like me,
Sure.
or, who look like me. I think that's the number one thing, because just 20 years ago, that's not that long ago, doctor, just 20 years ago, there was no one that looked like that. As far as being Pakistani American, I think it's so important. And I do think newsrooms are finally noticing this. A diverse newsroom is a very important newsroom. You want to hear every thought, every race, every religion. And that's becoming more. And I think we're learning that even with what's going on in the Middle East right now. We're hearing a lot more opinions, for better or worse. And I think people are being exposed to a lot more vantage points that maybe we wouldn't have been exposed to a few years ago. We've seen certain protests that we probably wouldn't have seen either 5-6 years ago. So I just like that, whether it's being Pakistani or Middle Eastern or Palestinian or Hispanic, I just think the fact, I hope we come to a day where no newsroom or no agent's going to be told, hey, we already have a Pakistani in here, thank you. I would like to think those days are ending, because I heard that a lot. Or there, we already have a Latin reporter in here. It's just the skin color. We're looking for a blonde, things like that. I would like to think with more people that look like me and you and just the diversity, those conversations now end. And you really just go by talent and not just put me on for 5 seconds, see the color of my skin and, pop me off.
So, I mean, first off, that is the hope, right? That like we see each other as, professionals, as journalists, as physicians, as, accountants, whatever,
Right.
as opposed to always putting our identity in front of us. And yet, as this has evolved over the past 20, 25 years, and the representation actually grows stronger and more normalized, where we do see a lot more inclusion and belonging and diversity in newsrooms and other areas where there are lots of stakeholders. Is there sometimes, as that grows stronger, is there ever a risk for our identities to be taken for granted?
I don't think we're anywhere. I would like to think we're not there yet, I would like to think that people are now appreciating what we look like and our backgrounds and our perspectives. I'm not saying that's not going to happen in a few years, but I'd like to think that it is going, and I would also like to believe it's going, I don't know if we're there yet, going beyond the color of our skin, where you just see me as a journalist and not some brown girl telling you the news.
Right. And yet it's compelling because when someone who looks like you or has the same experiences as you sees that, they're going to obviously, have, or not obviously, but perhaps inherently have much more of a deeper connection to you and feel like they're being sort of like seen and heard and represented on a screen much differently than perhaps those of us who grew up in the 70s, 80s, 90s.
I was just going to say that's all we wanted as a kid. I mean, the closest I got when I was a kid was Christian Anandpur, who was the amazing, but she was the closest I could get to South Asian, and she's not even South Asian, she's Middle Eastern. So that's what you hope, that these conversations, in 15 years, this isn't even a conversation where, hey, I'm the first Pakistani anchor in the world or in the country.
Yeah, and again, hopefully there's never that point where it gets taken for granted, and we get closer and closer to just hearing and seeing talented and interesting people on the screen who are kind of making sure that their professional work is really being embodied through lots of great integrity. I want to leave it at this, and so curious about this one. We all know that the calculus of trust in news and information has truly just changed so much. I mean, you mentioned it yourself that there has been transformations when it comes to legacy media, to OTT, to TikTok, and things that are on demand. So in the past 10 to 15 years, when expertise and mastery has to compete with followers and likes and virality in the moment, how do you navigate as a professional going about cultivating trust?
I don't know if I've done it yet. I would just like to believe that viewers, I don't want you to trust me as soon as you put on the TV and see me. I want to earn your trust. And I think for any journalist or news show or news outlet that you're watching or check every day, I would like to believe that they've earned your trust. So don't, be a little skeptical when I'm telling you the news, but do your research. Find out what you're skeptical about or what you don't like, that, if there's something I said that you don't like, why is that? So I think that the importance is research. Don't just fall into your own echo chamber. And it's so easy for me to say, but it really is one of the biggest problems in journalism right now.
It speaks back to developing long-term relationships, and especially when the long-term relationship is maybe 8 seconds long. How do you combat that when, by, compelling people to come back to trusting you for their information?
I would like to think that the old school journalism is still intact when it comes to storytelling, getting the great interviews. I've been in newsrooms where news directors were like, if it bleeds, it leads. There's certain, and every newsroom is different. I think I think the hardest part of getting people to come back is, let's say if it's a violent story or it is a school shooting, when you just share the empathy and not just share the bleeds, it leads comment, share, or just share the gore of it. I think inherently I would like to think inherently it comes back to journalism 101, where it's just the storytelling and you believe what I'm saying and I'm showing you different points of views. And I think that's where it comes from, whether it's 20 years ago or even now. And I'm not undermining the importance of social media. It is very important. I hate to admit that a lot of this comes to followers and who's looking at your pages. And that is an unfortunate aspect, but it's not going anywhere. So you just have to jump on that bandwagon.
Well, exuding empathy and leading with empathy and, having that both integrity and that technical expertise, I think more and more people are appreciating it from you, Hena. So thank you so much for joining us. This was really a terrific conversation, and I hope we can come back and visit with you again.
I hope so too. Your questions were fantastic. Truly one of the best interviews I've had.
Thanks so much, Hena. And please check Hena out on Morning in America every weekend on News Nation. Remember to be kind to yourself, your neighbors, and to the planet. Till next time, I'm Abhay Dandekar.